Johnny, the Halos made it really difficult to be an Angel fan this last weekend against the Red Sox. I feel like everything went wrong. How do you fix it? Well, you and I, we've got some answers and we're going to share it. It's time to get locked on with Mike and John, and this is Locked On Angels.
You are Locked On Angels, your daily Los Angeles Angels podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Angels your first listen of the day. We are available on all platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the best way to help us out is by giving us a rate and a review. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you're subscribed and click the bell to be notified every time a new episode drops. And today's show is brought to you by the Ultimate Pro Baseball GM. If you've ever dreamed about being an MLB GM and managing your own franchise, then this game is just for you. You can download it by visiting ultimatebaseballgm.com or looking it up in the app stores. And our Locked On listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in the game store.
Thanks for being here for this episode of Locked On Angels, where it's your team every day. You've got the Frisch Brothers here with you, a.k.a. the Super Halo Bros. My name is John, and that's my brother Mike.
And my name is Mike, and that's my brother John.
You've got the number one daily Los Angeles Angels podcast with you. We've been fans of this team for years. It's our second season covering the Halos for you here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're grateful for those of you who have joined us maybe for the first time, or maybe you consider yourself an everydayer. You're here every day with us. Maybe even a day one since we started last season. So we appreciate you. We appreciate you if it's your first time or if you're an everydayer. Hey, coming up tomorrow on Locked On Angels, we're going to recap Ohtani's start in Boston, which is this morning. So It might have already happened if you're just tuning in.
Yeah.
But we do put these out pretty early, so maybe you caught it on your way to work or something. But Mike, on today's show, we got to talk about the defense this weekend. I would have loved to talk about Zach Neto's call-up and celebrate that as the big event of the weekend. But the Angels just continue to find ways to lose. Let's go back to Friday's game, which feels like a million years ago. Take us back to Friday.
It was a 5-3 loss, in case you forgot. I know that nobody forgot, but it was a 5-3 loss. And John, the two big stories in this game, errors and a lack of production with runners in scoring position. Mm-hmm. Angels were 1 for 14 with runners in scoring position, and they ended Friday, listen to this, with a 614 on-base percentage, good for 28th on-base plus slugging percentage, OPS, good for 28th in baseball, the third worst in baseball. And so they've struggled, and they've struggled mightily, and you wonder, with this lineup, why they're struggling so much, especially with runners in scoring position. Is it just because it's early, John, and the numbers kind of sway to one direction or the other if you do really well or if you don't do really well? Or do you think that there's something fundamentally wrong when they get runners on base?
It's interesting because there's a lot of good bats in this lineup with good pop, and you see that from top to bottom. You're going to get a walk or a home run or at least a single with Taylor Ward. Mike Trout is always a threat. Shohei Ohtani, always a threat. Rendon, I know he's not been hitting. He got his first extra base hit on Sunday. I know he's not been hitting doubles or anything above a single, but he still got like a 300 average in the
400 on base,
Yeah, and 400 on base. Hunter Renfroe should be hitting bombs. I think it's just early, Mike. I think these bats need to come around. We're starting to see some of that from like Brandon Drury, who's been struggling. And I went back and looked at his season last year, and he didn't have a great April then either. I also have to wonder, how did things go in spring training? And I know that not everybody was at the WBC, but a lot of guys were at the WBC, and the lineup that was going out there every day in spring training isn't the lineup that we have now, if that makes sense. Because you got Trout and Ohtani, things like that. They were gone. Some of the starting pitching was gone, right? But all that to say, for them to not be able to deliver when it matters, 1 for 14 with runners in scoring position.
Yeah, tough.
Somebody asked, like, why don't they put down a bunt? And I think that's a really important question to consider. But when you think of the circumstances of somebody like Hunter Renfroe, who probably could bunt, it's just when you have the bases loaded, I think you take 4 runs and clear bases than a out and a single run.
For sure. I think that question kind of lines itself with somebody like a Rengifo, though, right? Like Rengifo was really struggling, and he had a couple opportunities to knock in some runs. And I think the question is, legit, because in those moments, why aren't you bunting the runners over? Because he is struggling, right? And he's swinging for the fences, and something has kind of shifted in him. He was really great to start the season, and then like in the next 7 to 10 games, he really, really struggled. And speaking of struggling, John, it was the errors on the field, right? Like Rendon had 2 of them after making a really great play. You and
I are Rendon truthers. We'll defend Anthony Rendon, but somebody called him Tony 2 errors.
That was funny. It was funny. Yeah. I just love that play where he like jumps and dives and then bounces the ball to second base. It was so good. But then his 2 throws over to first base, that sidearm throw, he's done it for years, but it just does not get over to first base accurately. Now, please don't hear me be a Rendon defender in this moment, but Jake Lamb is just not athletic over there.
Jared Walsh would have got those.
Right? He would still have to do his ballet and his yoga over there like we've talked about, but
Rendon's
gotten those.
Rendon's got to aim for the chest. Like, come on, dude.
He looked like me playing softball when we played in our church league, right? I couldn't throw from third base. They stuck me in left field.
It was very frustrating because those are the reasons why Patrick Sandoval didn't get to go deep into this game, Mike. 3 2/3 innings pitched, 2 runs, no earned runs, and he was really done in by the errors. And the question here is, we think about depth. We think about the necessary moves that Perry Manassian made in this offseason to replenish anybody who gets hurt or has to sit out a game. You've got good backup options. You've got good options all the way around the field. But when you have somebody like Brandon Drury who can play first in the outfield and second, but then he's not quite hitting well.
Yeah.
Was it a mistake to prioritize the offense here over the defense? What do you think?
I don't think so, and here's why. I think you needed to get this lineup stretched, and we were able to do that. I mean, they've had great games where they've scored a lot of runs, and then something else happened, and we'll talk about those games coming up. But I think what the main issue is here, John, and I know they're major league players, and they should have it together, but I do think that jumping to different positions and not knowing where you're going to be consistently, I think that matters. So on Sunday, I work at a church. I was talking to somebody who visited from another church who is a singer at their church. And she said she loved being at our church. However, she said it was weird being in the different environment because there's this comfort at her church. And then at ours, it was different. It's larger and there was more people. And I think that is a reality of anybody in any occupation, because they're being moved to a situation maybe that they're not comfortable with. And I think when it comes to baseball, these guys are like Drury. He's a second baseman, but putting him at first or putting him at third, maybe that kind of messes with him. This is not an excuse, but I do think that you have to get into the mindset of being ready. I only think that there's only a few players that are able to do that and do that really well. And you can probably name them on one hand and that's it. And I don't think that what we've done with our guys is really give them some consistency at their roles. I think Drury should be at second. I think Urshela should be at short. And I think that we should have Jake Lamb playing first and Rendon at third consistently until Jared Walsh comes back. And I don't think that should move around too much because Rengifo's not great on defense. I do think he's a backup, although I would love to see him get some at-bats, and I think he can prove himself. But he has shown lately to not be somebody that we can count on. And so that all boils down for me. What it boils down to is that it's defense consistency, like being in that position on a regular basis, I think matters to these guys. And you're seeing like Drury being at first base, like, oh, I forgot to turn, or I forgot to throw the ball, or at second base, like he's thinking about maybe being at first base, right? Like, I get it. Again, they got to be major league players. They got to hold it together. But I do think that consistency matters.
Consistency matters, of course, especially when you're playing defense. But then you have errors from a guy who plays third base every single day of his life in Anthony Rendon.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, dude, what are you doing? And I was concerned, Mike, that maybe the wrist was an issue, the wrist that he had surgery on. You saw him like almost swinging it one-handed at some point. So I'm like, when do we get the news that Anthony Rendon is out because of his wrist issues, even though he had surgery on it last season? It's really concerning to me. And we've seen him make that error before. I think it was really amplified by the fact that it cost Patrick Sandoval the game. And Rengifo had one like roll up his glove, and that cost him. And it didn't allow Patrick Sandoval to get into the game very deep at all. So I understand the frustration. I think I'm more concerned about like, great, when do we get the word that Anthony Rendon's going to be hurt again? Yeah. Because we need him in this lineup. We need his on-base percentage. We need him to hit guys in front of him, which he's doing pretty well. And when guys are in front of him, right? And so all that to say, those errors are frustrating. I understand the frustration out of Friday. And I even tweeted, this team needs Jared Walsh back in a big way.
I think
because I think that he brings something to the clubhouse. Look, we need him at first base. That has to happen. And I know that he's going through his treatment. He actually completed the treatment for his insomnia and his migraines. He's back home. The word is that he's going to start ramping up soon. Phil Nevin said they'll have more of a better timeline by the middle of the week. But I think just as a clubhouse guy who can help people gel together, I think that is Jared Walsh in a nutshell. When you see him on videos where, the Halos are going to elementary schools to play ball with the kids or whatever, he's the shining star, man. And I have to believe that that's who he is all the time. When he said, Happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there, and I said, Jared Walsh is a mother lover, I think that's just his personality, right?
Yeah.
That's just who he is. So I think that him being back is going to be a great benefit, not only defensively, but to help this team gel, because there's a lot of new faces on this team. And I think that is a big issue that we're facing right now. Hey, coming up on Locked On Angels, what's the solution here? What has to give in the next few games? We're going to talk about that coming right up.
Today's show is brought to you by the Ultimate Pro Baseball GM. It's a great game, and it allows you to manage every strategic aspect of a franchise, playing through the seasons and leading your franchise and fans to glory as you build a historic dynasty. In this simulation, you're responsible for hiring the right coaches and the right staff, managing finances, scouting and drafting players, managing through difficult personalities and injuries, and navigating your franchise through free agencies and all of the ups and downs of a regular season. All of this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Baseball GM is completely free and playable offline, which means you can play on the go whenever and wherever you want. And Locked On Angel listeners, you get a 100% free boost to your franchise when you use the promo code LOCKEDON in the game store. So download this game by visiting probaseballgm.com or scan the code if you're watching on YouTube, or look it up in the App Store. That's probaseballgm.com. The Ultimate Pro Baseball GM. Start your dynasty today.
Thanks for making Locked On Angels your first listen today. Hey, coming up tomorrow, Lindsey Crosby of Locked On MLB Prospects is going to join us. He's going to give us a deeper look and understanding of what we've got in Zach Neto, and we're going to circle back on Logan O'Hoppe. We talked about him in the offseason with Lindsey Crosby, how excited we were and how excited he was. So we're going to circle back on him as well. Speaking of which, Mike, Zach Neto Saturday got the call up. That surprised us all.
Yeah.
And it was a very exciting moment for him and his family. I reached out to Maggie Neto on Twitter and I just said, this is awesome. And she said, we're so excited. We're going to Boston right now. And I said, you got Mike and John behind you. We're excited for him. So yeah, he is going to be playing shortstop from this point forward, and at least until a move needs to be made or something, but for the foreseeable future, he's going to be here. Now, the Angels did option David Fletcher to AAA, which I think is a very good thing.
I agree.
He's been off the bench. He obviously has not gotten right, and I think he needs reps, and I think AAA is the best place for him. Unfortunately, they did move Chris Rodriguez to the 60-day injured list.
Yeah.
And while we were kind of hopeful that he could be back soon and jump into the bullpen and bring that velocity that he has, doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon. But this is a bold move, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I actually love this move, John. It was the good news of the weekend, just because Perry has shown that he is going to call people up regardless of their experience when he feels like they're ready. And he's shown that he's going to cut and option players regardless of their contract if he feels like they are not pulling their weight. And what I like about this is that he's bringing up a guy who really is I think going to be a really talented guy for now and for the future. And I know that there were questions about, like, is it too soon? I think with this team, you just can't think about that. I think with this team, you need to bring up these players, because the options outside of Zach Neto would have been like Livan Soto or Velasquez. And truthfully, they're both really struggling in AAA. Soto's hitting 149 and Velasquez is hitting 177. And they're both striking out about 30 to 31% of the time. And so I think this is a great move after that terribly defensive game on Friday night. you need somebody who is a shortstop that can handle himself at short. And then this does put, talking about consistency, it does put Brandon Drury in a regularly scheduled position at second base.
Yes.
And you could put Gio there if you wanted to, or put Gio at first base.
I like Gio at first.
I loved him at first base, and the dude hit a grand slam in this game at first base. And so it might be a really good move for them moving forward. Although Saturday's game was tough, Johnny, because the Angels did lose that game 9-7, but it really wasn't that the hitting didn't come through or that the bullpen couldn't carry their weight. Johnny, it was the 8th inning when Matt Thaiss suddenly became a little leaguer and was interfering with the bat twice, and it cost the Angels 2 runs.
It's interesting to me because I know Shohei had the same call during his at-bat when the Boston catcher also interfered. So maybe there's something funny with the box, but man, that was so frustrating. It's frustrating when it happens once, but then it happens twice, and it screwed up that whole inning. And by the end of it, Ryan Tepera has a shoulder issue, needs to go on the IL because that inning was just taking forever. And it really was frustrating. Yet another way for the Angels to lose, Mike. I said on our post-game video, our Locked On Now, that I would have loved to talk about Gio Urshela's grand slam and his 5 RBI day. I would have loved to talk about Zach Neto and the day that he had. Unfortunately, I had to talk about Matt Thaiss and the catcher's interference. And I had a lot of people respond and say, well, Tyler Anderson didn't have a great start, or Mike Trout missed that fly ball. And I understand that. But once you have the lead again, all of that goes out the window for me. Everything that went bad prior to that, when you're up 7-6 or what have you, all of the stuff that happened before the lead goes out the window for me. I don't care about Tyler Anderson's start. I don't care that Mike Trout didn't get that ball in the outfield, which was right up against that storage locker, that storage warehouse door thing out there. So, I mean, it's like not even a straight wall. It's like kind of curved.
He would have had to Willie Mays that catch if he was going to bring that ball in.
Exactly. And that's just because Boston, Fenway is such an old park, right? And so anyway, for me, the lead, once you have the lead back, all that stuff goes out the window. Just finish the game. Yeah. And unfortunately, it was those costly catcher's interferences from Matt Thaiss that ended up costing the game.
Well, and Tepera got one out, and then it was because Thaiss interfered with the bat that runner got to go to first base. So who knows what would have happened if Tepera was able to record that out when Taylor Ward made that catch in left field. It could have been a different ball game and a different inning for them. Mm-hmm. I think it's Ryan Tepera, and Ryan has just been really frustrating for us as Angel fans because he hasn't done anything in close games, in tight games, that feels like he's really helped this team. Now, maybe the stats would say differently, but the eye test for me as a fan, it's like when he comes in, man, I just am going crazy, right? Yeah, like I'm like, why isn't Quijada in there? Or why is Estevez coming in the 7th inning? Like, it just doesn't feel like
why don't you keep using Estevez after a 1-2-3 inning?
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, like talk about consistency on the defensive side. I want to see some consistency in that bullpen. And I think that bullpen really lines up well if you do Herget, Quijada, and Estevez, some form or fashion in 7, 8, and 9. And that Tepera and Loop are your 5th and 6th inning guys. They're just bridge builders to that. I don't know why Phil Nevin keeps thinking that they're going to handle themselves in high leverage situations. And I get that he's probably thinking to himself, well, I already used this guy the day before and he needs a day off. But he did have Carlos in the inning prior to when Tepera came in. So why not just swap them? Why not just have somebody else come in that moment? It just doesn't make sense to me. It feels like a big kind of managerial error there.
Yeah, and he had Matt Moore go 2 innings, and
I love that, by the way. I love
too. It's about dang time. Yeah. And so here's what I think. Phil Nevin, I think, has made plenty of mistakes so far this season.
Yeah.
But when he's finally letting Matt Moore go 2 innings, when he brings in Carlos Estevez and lets him pitch, what I found interesting was that particular inning was the most high leverage situation. It would have been, the 7th inning was more high leverage than the 8th or the 9th would have been because you're facing Rafi Devers and the heart of the order, right?
Sure.
So to me, it made sense to bring in Estevez. To not bring him in again for the 8th, I think it was a mistake. And I'm starting to feel like Phil, perhaps like with the fact that he used Matt Moore for 2 innings, maybe he's learning from his mistakes.
Is this reps? Is he like working out in the gym and he's getting
I guess
better,
so, man, because
right?
like it feels like a completely different person from last season
Yeah.
in terms of how he handled the bullpen and things like that. And for him to, make the same mistake twice with Matt Moore to Jimmy Herget. And then we saw the results of that. And now it seems like, okay, yeah, you do let Matt Moore go 2 more innings because he can. He was a starter.
Right.
I'm hoping that he's learning from his mistakes here. Like I said, Tyler Anderson was bad. He hadn't been great in his first 3 starts. He did go against Oakland, and that was fine. But in 14 2/3 innings, he's got a 6.75 ERA,
Yeah.
8.28 FIP, and 10 strikeouts, 8 walks, and 19 hits. And he said that he just doesn't have a feel for his pitches right now. There was something said on Sunday's broadcast about the fact that usually the shadows that are between the hitter and the pitcher affect the hitter more. But Gooby said for the pitchers, you might not be able to see your target. And I noticed that with Anderson because he was missing a ton. He was missing his spots. He was getting a ton of balls and not putting the ball where he should have been putting it behind the plate. The last thing I'll say is, though Zach Neto didn't get a hit this weekend so far, there is today's game for him to get a shot. His approach at the plate, Mike, looks really good.
It does.
He is not swinging at junk. He's not swinging out of the zone. He had 2 strikeouts in his debut that were bad calls off the plate from the umpire. And so I know that his biggest thing has been grounding to third base. I'd like to see him make an adjustment there, but he's got power off the bat. He's hitting it 105 off the bat in Sunday's game. And again, that approach at the plate, he's attacking the zone. It's not anything inside, outside, up, down. It's anything in the zone. His in the zone swing is very strong. So I'm looking forward to him figuring it out and making the adjustment and being able to handle some big league pitching as he continues with the Angels.
Today's show is brought to you by So Rare. This is a revolutionary fantasy baseball game and marketplace, transforming fans into owners with officially licensed digital cards featuring players from across all 30 MLB teams. Unlike other fantasy platforms, So Rare managers truly own their fantasy experience, collecting, buying, selling, and competing with cards against global opponents to win really great rewards. Win or lose, you still own your cards, and there's no cost to play. That's good news. Plus, the more you win, the more you advance. So collecting increasingly powerful cards actually comes when you do win, and you can access next level competitions and rewards. So to get started, head to sorare.com/lockedon. That's spelled SORARE.com, and you can draft your team of free player cards. You can set your lineup, and you can start competing today to win really great rewards. Again, that's sorare.com/lockedon to get started and play today.
All right, getting into our last segment of the day, covering Game 3. Look, the Angels lost their 3rd straight on Sunday, 2-1 to the Red Sox. And you know what, Mike? It wasn't the pitching.
No.
For once in our dang lives, it wasn't the pitching, because your boy, Reed Detmers, had a great outing.
He did.
6 1/3 innings
really
pitched, 2 runs off of a 2-run home run from Justin Turner and 7 strikeouts. He figured out that his slider, he could mix the speeds from a low or a high 80s slider to like a low 90s slider. And when he mixed those speeds, that's when he was really starting to get guys out. Just throwing your slider as hard as you can is not the solution.
Right.
It's a good way to mix up your pitch mix, but that's not the solution here. And I will say, the one pitch that he made a mistake on was a fastball that was not quite up and in enough on Justin Turner. And that guy is a veteran. He's gonna recognize that out of the
Angel
hand.
killer.
And that's what he did.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that was the only mistake Reed Detmers made. And I will, and hear me when I say this, I'm not happy that we lost, but I will take one mistake pitch from a pitcher who gives up a home run than bloop single, hit, walk, hit batter, bloop single, double. Like I'll take a mistake pitch for a home run every single time, because that tells me that Reed Detmers was almost perfect in this game. 6 1/3 inning. But the Red Sox beat us 2-1, and that's because nobody was swinging it, right?
Yeah, only 4 hits for this team. Trout and Ohtani 0 for 4. That's not a good sign, right? They've been really good in this series where their OPS, Trout's is over 1,000, Ohtani's over 950. So they've been really good in this series. But again, this game, it came down to them needing to come through. And there are stars, and I know that we're weighing a lot on them. Like they're carrying a lot of pressure. But they were up when we needed them to come through, and they just didn't come through. This is not to blame the loss on them, but this is why they're on the team. And I think that these are moments where we just desperately need them to come through. John, I'll exchange a Ohtani 3 for 5 game with 2 home runs and a double in the first, third, and fifth inning. And I'll take a 1 for 4 or 1 for 5 game from Ohtani, but that one hit from him or that one hit from Trout comes in the 9th. It comes when they are actually,
I know what you're saying.
They're needing that, right? And so we haven't seen that from this team. And there's some great stats out there that were tweeted on Sunday where it talked about how the Angels batting average just falls off a cliff in the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning. And unfortunately, we're scoring first, and the likelihood of you winning a game when you score first there's a high percentage there, right?
Significant.
But we've lost 5 games when we've scored first. And so we need to be the team that scores last as well. I'm glad that Reed Detmers pitched really, really well, but it's one of those games where you're down 2-1. You look at this lineup and you would say, oh, they're going to come through for me. But we just couldn't find it on Sunday.
The biggest problem here was that the opportunity for them to score came when they had Gio Urshela on first and they pinch ran him. On second, they pinch ran him for Brett Phillips, and he got picked off. Now, I did see somebody say maybe he was waiting for a ball in the dirt to maybe take third on, or maybe he was going to steal third. But with Zach Neto up at the plate, even on a ground out, I think that Phillips gets the third. Even on a single, he definitely scores on a single. And so for him to be hanging off the bag as much as he was, and then when he slid in, it was right into the foot of the Red Sox player. And so that was frustrating. And that was really our final moment in order to attack this team. And Mike, it just comes down to fundamentals, doesn't it?
Yep.
It feels like everything that's gone wrong for the Halos. I will say the one loss that I think is legit is when the Mariners beat up on Jose Suarez.
Yeah.
And that was the one game we lost to the Mariners.
Yeah.
Everything else kind of feels like the Angels getting in the way of themselves, right?
Sure. I think what this team needs to solve this issue is some discipline, John. I think they need to go out and they need to take some ground balls. And this is where Phil Nevin and whoever their infielder instructioner person is, they need to say, I need to see the little ball of your cap on the top of your head. I need to see that. Watch the ball into the glove, right? And then I need to see you with good fundamentals, good throwing motion over to first base. I know that seems so basic and so simple, but good teams have the basic and the simple down. Look at the teams like Houston Astros or the Dodgers or the Yankees, even the Red Sox. Like they've got these basic things down. They're going base to base. They're moving runners over. They're playing good defense. They're not shooting themselves in the foot. But I think, John, that all of this, like, oh my gosh, this is the worst team and this team is terrible. And all of that's just silly. It's silly because we're a game under 500 as of this recording. Sure. We're going to talk about the game that happens with Ohtani in Boston tomorrow. But we're 2 games behind the Rangers. The Astros are terrible. The Mariners are at 500. Sandy Alcantara has an ERA over 10, right? Like it's still pretty early. We're not even at the end of April yet. If this was in the middle of May, I would say, okay, we have some legit concern.
Sure.
But this team could win on Monday and they could take 2 or 3 from the Yankees and they could really get on a roll. They're gelling together as a team. That's not to excuse the terrible playing. That's not to excuse the mindless errors and Matt Thaiss costing the game for them. Like, if we're going to do those things, I would rather do those things now.
I get that.
Rather than in the future, rather than later on in the season. John, we've been Angel fans for a long time.
Yeah.
April is never a great month for the Halos. And so for those fans out there that are really frustrated, I think the reason why we're frustrated is because we had high hopes and we've been buttercupped so far. We've been told that this team is going to be really, really good, and we expected them to get off to a 10-1 start. but they're 7-8 as of this recording.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think that it's time to freak out about that. I think that we need to hope that they figure it out. Phil Nevin needs to make some better decisions, and this team needs to focus on discipline and fundamentals. Those are my thoughts. That's how you fix this. What are yours?
Well, we can't gloss over the fact that you have somebody like Gio Urshela, who came to this team to help us out in the infield. Guy's been a stud on this team.
Yep.
You've got the fact that they brought up Logan Ohtani and ran with him, and he's the best catcher we have, not because Max Stassi isn't on the team, but because Logan Ohtani is the best catching option. He's been phenomenal behind the dish and at the plate. And so there's a lot of things that are right about this team. There are a lot of things that are good about this team. You bring in Hunter Renfroe, that's a great option. The guy is a great outfielder, and he's a big bopper at the plate, and he's starting to come around.
Yep.
A healthy Rendon is the best Rendon, and we're seeing the benefits of that. But the thing is, you look at this team on paper, and it's a much more improved team than the teams that we've had in the past 8 years, right?
Yeah.
And it's a matter of putting it all together and gelling, like you said. But how does that happen? It starts at the top. It starts with Phil Nevin.
Yeah.
And it starts with discipline. And it starts with getting out there. You start fielding and warming up a little bit earlier in the day. Maybe this doesn't happen until they get home and they're back at Angel Stadium on Friday, but like they better be up bright and early, or at least bright and early for a baseball game. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. John, I think Phil needs to raise his voice a bit. And I think he needs to be a bit more firm. I don't know what happens inside the locker room, but I think Phil needs to raise his voice a bit. I think he needs to be really firm with this team. And I think he needs to say to the guys like, hey, do your job, take responsibility, show me some fire. Let's get on this. I love that we have the home run hat, but we also need maybe a defensive, like celebratory, chain or something like that, because I think that there needs to be some sort of like, hey guys, you're really not performing to the level that you need to perform. And this is pathetic. And I think that he needs to get a little bit more aggressive in that locker room, and he needs to fire up a Mike Trout, and he needs to fire up a Shohei Ohtani. And I want to see them, not just Shohei at the end of the game rolling his eyes and fans going, see, he doesn't want to be here. I want to see Shohei firing other team members up. I saw that Mike put his arm around Shohei in the dugout when they were losing on Sunday and encouraging him. I want to see that happen with the whole team, but not just like, hey man, we'll get him next time. I want to see them fire each other up and say, let's get him this time. Let's go play right now. Right?
Exactly. And you said you want Phil Nevin to hold the players responsible, and Phil Nevin needs to hold himself responsible for the decisions that he's made that have cost these Halos the game. What is up with sending Brandon Drury and taking the bat out of Logan Ohtani's hands yesterday? It's 2 outs, 2 strikes, 2 balls, Logan Ohtani up with 2 on, and Rengifo at third, and you take the bat out of his hands by sending Drury, who has
not a stolen base guy,
like 5 stolen bases in his career.
Right.
Phil Nevin needs to hold himself responsible too. Everybody needs to be held accountable here. I hope they have a closed door meeting soon, because I think that's going to be very necessary.
Thanks for making Locked On Angels your first listen today. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. And remember that we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at Locked On Angels and at Super Halo Bros on Twitter and Instagram. Mike, we have a very exciting episode coming up tomorrow. Tell us about it.
Lindsey Crosby's going to be here. We're going to talk about Zach Neto. We're going to talk about Logan Ohtani. And then we're going to ask him, hey, who's the next guy coming up? Is it Ben Joyce? I think it might be. And so we're going to see what Lindsey Crosby has to say tomorrow on Locked On Angels.
And we'll break down today's game it's probably already happened if you're watching this after the game, because it was 8 a.m. Pacific time, but we will be talking about Shohei's start on the mound for tomorrow's episode. Thanks everybody for being here. Whether it's your first time or you're an everydayer, we really appreciate you. Until tomorrow's show, my name is John, and that's my brother Mike.
And my name is Mike, and that's my brother John.
That's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Angels, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.